testing. All right, Math 0092, we're continuing with the operations for real numbers. And in Chapter 10, Section 5, we're going to be working with division of real numbers. Division where we have a real number divided by a real number. We might see the division sign like this. We could see it like this, A divided by B. Different division symbols we know, but B cannot be equal to 0 because division by 0 is undefined. Another one of those things you need to remember. Division by 0 is undefined. So no matter what symbol we're using, we cannot let the denominator take on a value of 0. So sign numbers, or real numbers, include sign numbers. So we might be dividing 14 by a -7. So that looks like 14 divided by a -7. Well, the denominator is -7 goes into 14. 7 goes into 14 2 times. Two times a -7. We're looking for 2 times 14. That'd be -14. So we need to have a -2 times a -2. We need to have a positive 14. So a -2 times a -7 would be positive 14. But then we subtract and get a remainder of 0. So -7 goes into 14, a -2 times. Now we should check. We have the quotient, -2, times the divisor, -7. If the signs are the same, it's going to be positive, and 2 times 7 is 14. So sure enough, that does check. So a little care with sign control when we're working with real numbers and signed numbers. So a -32 divided by a -4. Looks like a -4 goes into a -32. So a -4 times what would give us a -32? 8 times a -4 would be a -32, and then we draw our line and subtract. We get the opposite of -32, which is +32 for a remainder of 0. So our answer is 8. And checking our quotient times our divisor, 8 times a -4 would be 32, and the sign is going to be negative. So sure enough, our answer is 8. Seven divided by 0 is undefined. Division by 0, we have a denominator of 0 is undefined, and just be watching that. Oftentimes shows up on testing and homework questions. Well, then we're introducing reciprocals. 7/1 times what would give me a +1? Make sure positive. 7 times what would give me a +1? Well, 1/7. 7 times 1 in the numerator, 1 times 7 in the denominator is equal to a +1. So the number 7/1 reciprocal is 1/7. Now reciprocals, you may have heard flip it. Well, that's correct because a number, 7, times its reciprocal must equal a positive 1. So 7 over 1 times 1 over 7, we flipped it, and that's equal to 1. But your thought is a bit incomplete if we have a negative 2/3 times what equals a positive 1. We now have to be careful. We do need to include sign control. We have to end up with a positive 1. So a negative times a negative is going to be positive. 2/3, if I flip it, would be 3/2. 2 times 3 would be 6. A negative times a negative is positive, and 3 times 2 is 6, which is another name for positive 1. So with reciprocals, the reciprocal of a number is flip it, but keep the sign. If it's positive, your reciprocal will be positive. If your number is negative, your reciprocal will be negative. We have to maintain sign control when we're working with reciprocals. So negative 5 times what would give me a positive 1? Well, I'm going to flip it. That'd be 1 over 5. But I keep the sign. A negative times a negative is positive. The reciprocal of negative 5 is negative 1/5. And we note that 0 has no reciprocal. So the reciprocal of a number has the same sign as the number itself. So let's build a little chart and investigate. Okay, if our number is a negative 3/8, the opposite would be 3/8, and the reciprocal would be flip it and keep the sign. Because 3/8 times a negative 3/8 times a negative 8/3 is a positive 24 over 24, another name for positive 1. 19. Well, 19 is a whole number, 19 over 1. Its opposite would be negative 19. Its reciprocal would be 1 over 19, and we keep the sign, so it's positive. Negative 7.9. Well, negative 7.9's opposite would be 7.9, and the reciprocal, well, this is negative 7.9 over 1. We're going to flip it 1 over 7.9 and keep the sign. A negative 7.9 over 1 times a positive times a negative 1 over 7.9 would be equal to my positive 1. So now when we divide signed numbers, a divided by b equals 1a times 1 over b, where b cannot be equal to 0, of course. So if I have something divided by b, I can change to multiplication, which we already know how to do. We know sign control for multiplication. Multiply by the reciprocal. So 2/3 divided by a negative 5/4. Well, our directions say to change division to multiplication and multiply by the reciprocal. I'm going to flip it and keep the sign. Now, we already know how to multiply signed numbers. We've been working on that in section 10.4. So we're defining division in terms of something we already know, multiplication. And multiplication of fractions, by the way, is a piece of cake. 2 times a negative 4 is a negative 8, and 3 times 5 is 15. I can't simplify that any further. A negative 5/6 divided by a negative 3/4. Well, our directions say when we divide real numbers, we should change division to multiplication and multiply by the reciprocal. flip it, and keep its sign. Well, we already know how to multiply sign numbers, so we're defining division in terms of multiplication, something we already know. Negative times a negative is going to be positive. 5 times 4 is 20. 6 times 3 is 18. That is positive. I know that 2 will go into both the numerator and the denominator. I'll get 10 over 9, which cannot be further simplified. A negative 3/4 divided by 3/10. Remember, division. We're going to change division to multiplication, something we already know how to do, and multiply by the reciprocal. Flip it and keep its sign. Multiplication of fractions is a piece of cake. Negative 3 times 10 is a negative 30, and 4 times 3 is 12. This is even. Let's see, 6 goes into 12 and 6 goes into 30. 6 goes into 30 negative 5 times, and 6 goes into 12 twice. So my answer is negative 5 halves. Negative 27.9 divided by a negative 3. This is division, so we're going to change division to multiplication and multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 3 over 1 is 1 over 3. Flip it and keep its sign. A negative times a negative is positive. I have a negative 27.9 over 1 times negative 1 over 3. Multiplication of fractions is a piece of cake. I'll get positive 27.9 over 1 times 3 is 3. It looks like 3 goes into 27.9. That'd be 9.3 times. And then just a little bit of discussion about sign control of a number. A negative a over a negative b is equal to a positive a over b. And a negative a over b is equal to a over a negative b, which is equal to the opposite of a over b. We call this the ternary placement. This is the opposite of a over b. This is a over the opposite of b. And this is the opposite of a over b, and they're all equal. So our sign can be in the numerator, sign can be in the denominator, or the sign can be out in front, representing the opposite. Then on page 630, we have a story problem. The mine near Chile caved in on August 5th, 2010, trapping 33 miners. Each miner was safely brought out in a specifically designed capsule that could be lowered into the mine at a negative 137 feet per minute. It took approximately 15 minutes to lower the capsule to the miner's position. Determine how far below the surface of the earth the miners were trapped. Well, the capsule could be lowered into the mine at a negative 137 feet per minute. And it took 15 minutes to get to their location. So we were going down 137 feet per minute for 15 minutes to reach them. So each minute we went down 137 feet. We went down that far for 15 minutes. So the distance is equal to a negative 137 feet and we went down 137 feet per minute for 15 minutes. 15 times a negative 137 is a negative 2,055 feet. This is number 1 on page 634. The temperature in Osgood was 62 degrees Fahrenheit at 2 p.m. It dropped 6 degrees per hour for the next 4 hours. What was the temperature at the end of the 4-hour period? Started at 62 degrees Fahrenheit at 2 p.m. and it dropped a negative 6 degrees Fahrenheit per hour for 4 hours. So our drop in temperature, negative 6 degrees Fahrenheit times 4 hours, was a negative 24 degrees Fahrenheit drop. So from our starting 62 degrees Fahrenheit, we decreased 24 degrees Fahrenheit. This is subtraction, remember? It's been a while since we've done that. Subtraction, we always change subtraction to addition and add the opposite. Now 24 from 64, or 24 from 62 is 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So the temperature after 4 hours was 38 degrees Fahrenheit. .43 on page 634. The price of a stock began the day at $23.75 per share and dropped $1.38 per hour for 8 hours. What was the price of the stock after 8 hours? So it started at $23.75 and dropped $1.38 per hour for 8 hours. So $1.38 times 8. It dropped $1.38 per 8 hour, an hour per 8 hours. So I have 1.38 times 8 hours for 1104. So it dropped 1104 in those 8 hours. So we want to find the difference. It dropped, which means it went down, so we're going to find the difference. It's 1721. So $12.71 is the new price of the stock after the 8-hour drop. After diving 95 meters below sea level, a diver rises at a rate of 7 meters per minute for 9 minutes. At that point, where is the diver in relation to the surface? After diving 90 feet below sea level, the diver raises at a rate of 7 meters per minute for 9 minutes. Well, let's just sketch a little draft here. This is sea level. And the diver dives down to a negative 95 meters below sea level. But he rises 7 meters per minute for 9 minutes. So 7 meters per minute for 9 minutes, that's multiplication. I get 63 meters. So he rises, that's a positive 63 meters. So the diver was at a negative 95 meters. He's rising 63 meters. Where is he now? Well, 63 from 95 is 32 meters. The absolute value of the larger is negative, so he's still negative below sea level at 32 meters below sea level. So the diver is now 32 meters below sea level, or the diver is at a negative 32 meters. So watch how the wording is at my math lab. Karen had $234 in her bank account after she used her debit card to make 7 purchases at $39 each. What was the balance in her account? So she's starting with a balance of $234. But she spent $39 7 times. So she made a $39 purchase 7 times. So that's 7 times 39, which is $273. So her starting balance, and she spent $273. So that's 234 subtract 273. Change subtraction to addition and add the opposite. 273 subtract 34. 234 would be 39. And keep the sign of the absolute value, which is larger, which is negative. So she is now negative $39 in her account. The population of a rural town is 12,500. It decreased 380 each year for 4 years. What was the population after 4 years? The starting population was 12,500. And for 4 years, it decreased 380 people. So 380 times 4 is 1,520. A negative times positive would be negative. So I have 12,500 minus 1,520. Decreased 380 people for 4 years. This is subtraction. I'm going to change subtraction to addition and add the opposite. 1,500 subtract the smaller absolute value, which is 1,520, and I get what 10,980. Keep the sign of the absolute value, which is larger, which is positive. So the population after 4 years, when it dropped 380 people each year, is now 10,980. So that brings us to the end of Chapter 10. So we'll look at our Chapter 10 summary and review. And that begins on page 636. And we're asked to find decimal notation for -5/8. So I have a -5/8, and I want it expressed in its equivalency in decimal notation. So I'll use my calculator. -5 divided by 8 is a -0.625. We're asked to find the relationship of -7 as it compares to 1, greater than or less than. Now my number line, 0, 1, -7. -7 is to the left of 1, so -7 is less than 1. We're supposed to find the absolute value of 17. Remember your absolute value bars? Absolutely, positively, what is the distance of -17 from 0? And -17 is 17 units from 0. We are looking at irregardless of sign. We want the absolute distance from 0. Then we're asked to add -5.6 plus a -3.9. Well, adding, I guess that's 15 carry the 1, 9, and I'm adding negative, so negative plus more negative will be a -9.5. Subtract 6 minus the opposite of 8. Subtraction. Remember, we change subtraction to addition and add the opposite of the number we're subtracting. 6 plus the opposite of -8. I have -8. I want its opposite is +8. We're supposed to multiply 6 times -15. 6 times 15 is 90. Fix your sign. A positive times a negative, your answer is negative. A -6 times a -15 is +90. When the signs are the same, your answer is positive. And 6 times 15, of course, is 90. When the signs are the same, your answer is positive. We're asked to divide a -4/3 by -12/5. When we divide, we change division to multiplication and multiply by the opposite of whatever it is we're dividing by. And it's reciprocal. Sorry, we'll do that again. We're asked to divide -4/3 divided by a -12/5. When we divide, we change division to multiplication and multiply by the reciprocal. And the reciprocal is flip it, but keep the sign. So now I have a -4/3 times a -5/12. Now, multiplication of fractions is a piece of cake. Multiply the numerators. The negative times negative is positive. And multiply the denominators. 3 times 12 is 36. Looks like it's even. 2 goes in, but 4 also goes in. The numerator and the denominator. 4 goes into 25 times, and 4 goes into 36 9 times. And then we're asked to simplify. We have 4 minus 8 squared divided by 10 minus 6. So remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. For precedence of operators, we have parentheses, so we're going to operate within the parentheses first. Copy everything else down the same. Don't be tempted to do anything else except we're working within the parentheses. Parentheses have priority. And that's subtraction, so I'm going to change subtraction to addition and add the opposite. I'm still working within parentheses, so I'll copy everything else down the same. 10 plus a negative 6 would be a positive 4. I can rewrite this, change subtraction to addition and add the opposite. And I'm dividing. And 4 doesn't need parentheses anymore. We know what its value is. We've resolved that within parentheses. So I have parentheses next exponents. 4 plus 8 squared would be 64. I need its opposite. Still dividing by 4. So I've checked off parentheses and exponents. Now I have multiplication and division. Here's division. So I have 4 plus negative 64 divided by 4. 4 goes into negative 64. 16 times. 4 times 16 would be positive. I need a negative 16. 4 times a negative 16 would be a negative 64. And then I subtract to get a remainder of 0. So I have 4 plus a negative 16. Now I'm down to adding. 4 plus a negative 16. Subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. We'll get 12 and keep the sign of the absolute value, which is larger, for negative 12. All right, return to D2L for all our details regarding Chapter 10, homework and testing. And thank you very much.